During breakfast prep, my mother said, "You don't deserve happiness." So I told her the truth I'd hidden for years. I was standing at the stove scrambling eggs for my mother's birthday brunch when she said the words that would finally break 38 years of silence between us. She was sitting at my kitchen island, watching me cook in my own home, in the house I'd bought with my own money, and she said in that particular tone she'd perfected over decades, "You know, Claire, I've been thinking about your life, and I just don't understand why you think you deserve to be this happy. It's almost selfish, really, how much you've taken for yourself." The spatula froze in my hand, and I felt something that had been coiled tight in my chest for most of my life suddenly begin to unwind. My therapist had warned me this moment might come, had prepared me for years for the possibility that my mother would eventually push too far, would finally say the thing that would force me to choose between protecting her feelings and protecting my own sanity. I just hadn't expected it to happen while I was making her favorite breakfast on her 72nd birthday, with my husband in the next room setting the table and my 2 children still asleep upstairs in their beds. I turned off the stove very carefully, set down the spatula, and looked at my mother sitting there in my kitchen wearing the expensive cashmere sweater I'd bought her for Christmas, drinking coffee from the French press I'd made for her, in the home I'd built without any help from her whatsoever. She was looking at me with that expression I knew so well, the one that said she was disappointed but not surprised, the one that communicated I was somehow perpetually falling short of standards she'd never quite articulated but expected me to intuitively understand and meet. And I realized, standing there with eggs congealing in the pan, that I was done. I was so completely, thoroughly done with protecting her from the truth about who she was and what she'd done to me. "You're right," I said, and my voice came out steady in a way that surprised me. "Let's talk about what I deserve. Let's talk about happiness and selfishness and who's taken what from whom. But I need you to understand that once we have this conversation, we can never go back. Once I tell you what I've kept hidden for 38 years, our relationship will fundamentally change. So I'm going to ask you one time. Are you sure you want to have this conversation? Because if you say yes, I'm going to tell you everything, and I don't think you're going to like what you hear." My mother looked startled, which was rare for her. She was a woman who prided herself on never being caught off guard, on always being in control of every situation and every relationship. But something in my tone must have communicated that this wasn't the usual dynamic where she said something cruel, and I absorbed it silently while making excuses for her in my head. "I don't know what you think you're going to tell me," she said, but her voice had lost some of its certainty. "I'm your mother. I know everything about you." And that's when I laughed, actually laughed out loud in a way that made her flinch. "You don't know anything about me, Mom. You know the version of me I've been performing for you since I was 5 years old. You know the daughter who tried desperately to earn your approval, who twisted herself into knots trying to figure out what you wanted from her, who internalized every criticism and every disappointed look until she could barely recognize herself anymore. But you don't know me. You've never known me. And I'm about to tell you why." I pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, and I could see her calculating whether she should get up and leave, should shut this down before it started, should reassert her authority the way she always had. But something kept her in her seat. Maybe curiosity, maybe the same sick fascination we all have with car accidents and disasters, maybe some small part of her that actually wanted to know the truth even if it hurt. "Do you remember when I was 5 years old and I won the school art competition?" "Yes." She looked confused by the question, clearly not seeing how this connected to anything. "I won first place for that painting of our garden. And the principal called you to tell you how talented I was, how I had a real gift. Do you remember what you said to me when I came home excited to show you the ribbon?" My mother's face had gone very still, very careful. That was over 30 years ago, Claire. I can't be expected to remember every little interaction we had when you were a child. But I could see in her eyes that she did remember, that she knew exactly what she'd said, and that she'd been hoping for 33 years that I'd forgotten. You told me that pride was a sin, I said quietly. You told me that I shouldn't think I was special just because I'd won some silly school contest. You said that lots of children could paint nice pictures if they tried hard enough, and that the real achievement would be learning humility and not letting success go to my head. And then you threw away the ribbon while I was at school the next day, and when I asked you where it was, you said you didn't know and maybe I should be more careful with my things. I watched her face carefully, watched her process the memory and search for the justification she'd probably been telling herself for decades. I was trying to teach you not to be arrogant, she said, but her voice was defensive now. I was trying to make sure you didn't become one of those insufferable children who think they're better than everyone else. I nodded slowly. And when I was 7 and I made the advanced reading group, and the teacher said I was reading at a high school level, you told me that being smart wasn't the same as being wise, and that book knowledge didn't make someone a good person. When I was 9 and I won the spelling bee, you said that spelling wasn't a real skill and I should focus on things that mattered. When I was 12 and I got straight A's for the entire year, you said grades didn't measure character and I shouldn't be so focused on achievement. I could see her starting to understand where this was going, starting to see the pattern I was laying out for her. Every single time I succeeded at something, every time I was proud of myself, every time I felt good about an accomplishment, you found a way to diminish it, to make it smaller, less important, not worth celebrating. And I internalized that, Mom. I internalized it so deeply that even now, at 43 years old, even after building a successful career and a happy marriage and raising 2 incredible children, I still have this voice in my head that sounds exactly like you, telling me I don't deserve to be proud, I don't deserve to be happy, I don't deserve any of the good things I've worked so hard to create. My mother was shaking her head, her hands trembling slightly around her coffee cup. I was trying to keep you grounded. I was trying to make sure you didn't become entitled or spoiled. My own mother praised me for everything, and it made me unprepared for the real world. I was protecting you from disappointment. And there it was, the justification, the rationalization, the story she'd been telling herself for decades about why her cruelty was actually love. You weren't protecting me, I said, and my voice was harder now. You were projecting your own damage onto me. You were taking out your relationship with your mother on your own daughter. And in the process, you taught me that I wasn't allowed to feel good about myself, that happiness was somehow dangerous or wrong, that being proud of my accomplishments made me a bad person. I stood up and started pacing, the words flowing out of me now like they'd been waiting decades to escape. Do you know what happened when I went to college? When I finally got away from you and your constant criticism and your disapproval? I excelled. I got a full scholarship to a top university. I graduated summa cum laude. I got into a prestigious graduate program. And do you know why I didn't tell you about any of it until after the fact? Because I knew that you would find some way to diminish it, to make it smaller, to tell me it didn't really matter. So I stopped sharing my accomplishments with you entirely. I stopped seeking your approval because I finally understood that I was never going to get it. My mother's face had gone pale, and there were tears gathering in her eyes, but I couldn't stop now. This had been building for too long, pushing at the walls I'd built around it for too many years. When I met David, when I fell in love with him, I didn't introduce him to you for 8 months. Months, Mom. Because I knew you'd find something wrong with him, some reason why he wasn't good enough or why I was making a mistake. And when I finally did bring him home, you spent the entire dinner pointing out his flaws. His job wasn't prestigious enough. His family wasn't connected enough. He was too casual, too relaxed, not serious enough about life. And after he left, you sat me down and told me I was settling, that I could do better, That I shouldn't be so desperate to get married that I'd accept the first man who showed interest in me. The tears were flowing freely down my mother's face now, but I kept going because this truth had been buried for so long that it needed air, needed light, needed to be spoken out loud. I married him anyway. I married him because he was kind and loving and he saw me as someone worthy of happiness. And you came to the wedding, but you cried through the entire ceremony. And when people asked you why you were crying, you said it was because you were losing your daughter. Not because you were happy for me, not because you were celebrating my joy, but because you were making it about your loss. You couldn't even let me have that one day without making it about your feelings instead of mine. I sat back down across from her, exhausted now but also lighter, like I'd been carrying something impossibly heavy and had finally set it down. And then I had Emma, your first grandchild, and I really thought that maybe you'd change. That maybe seeing me as a mother would help you understand the kind of love I'd needed from you and never gotten. But do you remember what you said when you first held her? You said, "Well, she's not as pretty as I expected, but I'm sure she'll grow into her features. My newborn daughter," and that was your first comment. And when I called you out on it, when I said that was hurtful and inappropriate, you told me I was being too sensitive and that I needed to accept honest feedback instead of expecting everyone to lie to me. My mother was sobbing now, her carefully maintained composure completely shattered. I didn't mean, I was just trying to. But I held up my hand, cutting her off. I stopped letting you spend time alone with my children when Emma was 3 years old. Do you know why? Because I heard you tell her that her drawing wasn't very good, that she needed to practice more if she wanted to be a real artist. She was 3 years old, Mom. 3. And you were already starting with her what you'd done to me for my entire childhood. And I realized in that moment that I had a choice. I could protect my children from you, or I could let the cycle continue. So I chose my children. I chose to limit your access to them, to monitor every interaction, to never leave them alone with you where you could plant those same seeds of self-doubt and inadequacy that you planted in me. The kitchen was silent except for my mother's crying and the sound of the clock ticking on the wall. Upstairs, I could hear David moving around, probably wondering why breakfast was taking so long. But I stayed seated, watching my mother process 38 years of accumulated pain and truth, watching her face cycle through denial and anger and grief. Finally, she looked up at me with red, swollen eyes and said, "So this is what you think of me? This is who you think I am? Some kind of monster who deliberately hurt her own child?" I shook my head slowly. "No, Mom. I think you're a damaged person who never dealt with your own trauma and ended up passing it on to me. I think you genuinely believed you were helping me, that you were preparing me for a harsh world by being harsh yourself. I think you confused love with criticism, thought that pointing out flaws was the same as encouraging improvement. I think you were probably treated similarly by your own mother, and you never questioned whether that was healthy or right because that's all you knew. But understanding why you did it doesn't make it okay. It doesn't undo the damage. It doesn't change the fact that I spent decades hating myself because you taught me that being happy was selfish and being proud was arrogant, and being successful meant I was becoming someone you couldn't love. My mother was quiet for a long time, staring down at her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was small and broken in a way I'd never heard before. "I did love you. I do love you. I just didn't know how to show it without trying to control it somehow. Without trying to make sure you didn't get hurt or disappointed or become someone I wouldn't recognize." My mother praised me constantly, and then when I failed at things, when I didn't get into my dream college, when my first marriage fell apart, when I couldn't live up to the potential everyone said I had, I felt like a complete fraud. Like I'd been lied to my whole life. And I thought if I prepared you for disappointment, if I made sure you had realistic expectations, you'd be protected from that feeling. I felt something twist in my chest, something that wasn't quite forgiveness but wasn't quite anger either. So instead of dealing with your own pain and disappointment, you made sure I never felt confident enough to risk disappointment in the first place. You kept me small so I couldn't fall far. And in doing that, you missed out on seeing who I actually am. Someone who took all that criticism and self-doubt and built something beautiful anyway. I have a career I love, a marriage that fulfills me, children who are confident and kind, and a life I'm genuinely proud of. And I did all of that despite your influence, not because of it. What do you want from me? My mother asked, and she sounded genuinely lost, genuinely confused about how to proceed from this moment. And I realized that this was the question I'd been waiting for her to ask for decades. Not an accusation, not a defense, not a justification, but an actual question about what I needed. I want you to acknowledge what you did, I said. Not make excuses for it, not explain why you thought it was right, but actually acknowledge that your behavior hurt me and shaped me in ways that weren't healthy. I want you to stop making comments about how I don't deserve happiness or how I'm being selfish by enjoying my life. I want you to see me as I actually am instead of as some flawed version of the daughter you wish you'd had. I took a breath, steadying myself for the hardest part. And I want you to go to therapy. Real therapy, with someone who specializes in family trauma and intergenerational patterns. Because if you can't examine your own damage and start to heal it, then our relationship can't continue the way it has been. I'm not willing to keep absorbing your projections and your disappointment anymore. I'm not willing to let my children grow up watching you treat me with barely concealed contempt and learning that's how family loves each other. So you have a choice. You can do the work to understand yourself and change your patterns, or you can continue as you are and have a very limited, surface-level relationship with me and essentially no relationship with my children. My mother looked stricken, like I'd asked her to cut off her own arm. That's not fair. You can't just cut me out of your life because I wasn't a perfect mother. Nobody's perfect, Claire. Everyone makes mistakes. And there was the defensiveness again, the refusal to fully own the impact of her choices. I'm not asking for perfection, I said firmly. I'm asking for accountability and genuine effort to change. And yes, I absolutely can set boundaries that protect my own mental health and my children's well-being. That's not cruelty, Mom. That's self-preservation. I spent 38 years prioritizing your comfort over my own pain, and I'm not doing it anymore. The conversation that followed was long and messy and involved a lot of crying from both of us. David eventually came downstairs, took one look at the situation, quietly made breakfast for the kids and kept them entertained upstairs while my mother and I continued talking. We went through decades of memories, moments where she'd said or done things that had hurt me, patterns I'd only fully recognized in therapy that had shaped my entire self-concept. Some of it she remembered differently than I did. Some of it she genuinely seemed to have forgotten or dismissed as insignificant. And some of it she finally, slowly, painfully acknowledged as harmful and wrong. By the time we finished talking, it was mid-afternoon and her birthday brunch had long since passed. My mother left my house looking older somehow, smaller, with the makeup she'd carefully applied that morning streaked and smudged from hours of crying. Before she walked out the door, she turned back to me and said, "I'll find a therapist. I'll do the work. I don't know if I can change completely. I'm 72 years old and these patterns are pretty deeply ingrained. But I'll try. Because losing you, losing my grandchildren, that's not an option I can accept." It's been 2 years since that conversation, and the relationship between my mother and me is still complicated, still fraught, still requiring constant navigation and boundary setting. She did find a therapist, a woman who specializes in maternal relationships and childhood emotional neglect, and she's been going every week for the past 2 years. The change has been slow and often painful, with lots of backsliding and defensiveness and moments where I've had to reinforce boundaries firmly and sometimes harshly. But there have also been moments of genuine breakthrough, moments where she's apologized without justification, moments where she's caught herself mid-criticism and stopped, moments where she's expressed pride in my accomplishments without diminishing them. Last month, Emma won a regional art competition, and when I told my mother about it, I held my breath waiting for the inevitable criticism or diminishment. Instead, she asked if she could see the winning piece, and when I showed her, she started crying. "She's so talented," my mother said. "Just like you were. Just like you are. And I'm so sorry I never told you that when you needed to hear it. It wasn't everything I'd needed from her my whole life, but it was something. It was a start. My children have a limited but positive relationship with their grandmother now. They see her for supervised visits where I'm always present, and I've been honest with them in age-appropriate ways about why their relationship with her looks different from their friends' relationships with their grandmothers. Emma, who's now 11, told me recently that she feels bad for Grandma because she seems like she's really trying to learn how to be nice, but it's hard for her. And I thought, yes, exactly, that's exactly what's happening. My mother is essentially learning emotional skills at 74 that most people develop in childhood. And it's awkward and difficult, and she fails at it regularly. But she's trying. I won't pretend that confronting my mother that day fixed everything or healed all my wounds. I'm still in therapy, still working through decades of internalized criticism and self-doubt, still catching myself when I start to minimize my own accomplishments or feel guilty about being happy. The damage my mother did runs deep, and undoing it is the work of a lifetime. But that conversation was necessary. It was the moment I finally chose myself, finally prioritized my own truth over her comfort, finally stopped performing the role of the grateful, uncomplaining daughter who absorbed criticism without complaint. Sometimes people ask me if I regret being so harsh with her, if I wish I'd been gentler or more diplomatic in how I communicated those hard truths. And honestly, I spent 38 years being gentle, being diplomatic, swallowing my hurt feelings and making excuses for her behavior. Gentleness hadn't worked. Diplomacy hadn't changed anything. Sometimes the truth needs to be delivered with clarity and force, especially when you're dealing with someone who spent decades refusing to see or hear it. My mother still struggles with understanding why what she did was harmful. She still sometimes falls back into old patterns, still occasionally says things that reveal she fundamentally doesn't understand that love without acceptance is just control with a prettier name. But she's trying, genuinely trying, in ways she never did before that conversation. And I'm no longer waiting for her to change completely, no longer hoping that someday she'll magically become the mother I needed her to be when I was a child. I've accepted that she is who she is, damaged and limited and sometimes cruel despite her best intentions, and I've built a life that's beautiful despite her influence, not because of it. The scrambled eggs from that morning ended up in the trash. We never did have the birthday brunch I'd planned. But we had something more important instead. We had truth. Raw, painful, necessary truth that cleared the air between us in ways that decades of polite pretense never could. And while our relationship will never be easy or uncomplicated, it's at least honest now. It's based on reality instead of the fiction we both maintained for so long. Her fiction that she was a loving mother who'd done her best, and my fiction that her treatment of me was somehow my fault for being too sensitive or expecting too much. I deserve happiness. I deserved it when I was 5 years old winning art competitions. And I deserve it now at 43 with a career and a family and a life I've built intentionally and carefully. And if my mother couldn't see that, couldn't acknowledge it, couldn't stop trying to make me small so she'd feel bigger, then she didn't deserve unlimited access to me and my joy. Setting that boundary, speaking that truth, choosing myself after decades of choosing her comfort, that wasn't selfish. That was survival, and it was long overdue.